The Sorceress. A story that, before we can talk about what The Sorceress is, let's talk about how it came to be. So, many of you are familiar by now with my story Metamorphosis, a story that crashed and burned, to say the least. And if you want to hear the full details about how and why it crashed and burned, go check out this link. It'll tell you everything. It's an earlier story sharing video, and you can get all the details there. But point was that after Metamorphosis crashed and burned, a lot of people were telling me, hey man, don't give up. Try rewriting it. Well, I didn't want to rewrite it, you know what? Because it wouldn't be the same story. And yet I still tried to capture some of the same ideas and themes from Metamorphosis and other stories, and yet none of those stories felt quite right. And I realized what I was doing. I was trying to recreate Metamorphosis, but just in a different format, and that wasn't working because Metamorphosis is always going to be its own story. So my buddy Aaron said, dude, what you really need to do is just come up with a concept that you think will be fun and creative for you and write that, and forget about worrying about how audiences will react or trying to make it just like this story, or, you gotta make it your own thing. And after some time, I sat down and I started creating a story idea that I thought would be neat. It was just a concept draft, but the concept draft was, you have a witch who lives by herself in the woods in a mountain range or some kind of mountainous area, and she helps a local police officer solve crimes of a supernatural nature using her magic and her knowledge and her know-how and her spells. Pretty simple. Just a day in the life of a typical witch helping a police officer. Pretty simple. Then I rewrote it and said, no, let's make it a little bit more dramatic. So then I ended up writing a story about a young girl who ran away from home and stumbled across a cabin where she ends up helping this old woman, and the old woman makes her a witch. And then the same thing implies. She helps out the cops solve problems. But then I rewrote that. And then I said, okay, let's make it where, what if there was a whole coven of witches and their whole goal is to protect the world from supernatural threats or aliens? And you have this sorceress who just recently joined the coven and they don't trust her for some reason, and she has to prove that she can be reliable. And then I said, okay, what if the reason they don't trust her is because before she was the new coven sorceress, she was a man, and they don't trust a former man being the coven sorceress, taking kind of an idea from Metamorphosis about that whole gender swap angle. And then I thought, okay, what if we change it again? What if this guy was dying of an incurable disease? His grandmother was the previous sorceress in the coven, and she passed on her magic to him, which turns him into the new sorceress, and she dies, but it saves him from his incurable disease, and now he has to somehow become a new recognized coven sorceress while also trying to stop this new supernatural threat. As you can see, it's gone through so many rewrites, so many different designs, so many different directions, and I'm not entirely sure what I want it to be. Do I want it to just be a simple day in the life kind of story of a witch like Kiki's Delivery Service, where we're just following this witch and the things she does? I mean, I could do that, but it probably wouldn't capture much of an audience, and I don't know, y'all would probably get bored with it after a while. Or do we want to follow the story of a big magical adventure of, trying to stop some kind of big danger from happening? I originally tried that in a story that I worked on with Hannah, which was also about a witch situation, and that didn't work out so well. So it's like I'm trying to capture this idea of a really fun magical adventure about this witch, or this sorceress rather, and I can't figure out exactly where I want it to go. Right now, where the story is, because I've written 13 to 14 chapters into it, and I've had to stop because I'm like, I don't know, It's the idea of, you got this young man who has been helping take care of this elderly woman, and she is actually secretly a member of the Sorceress Coven who protects the world from supernatural threats. She wants to retire, but you don't just retire. You can't just do that. Sorceresses, through their magic, are immortal, and the only way they can retire is if they're ready to die, and they pass on their magic to a new person, and that magical person becomes the new sorceress of the coven. Problem is, the coven can only be made up of women. So this guy that she trusts, he's the only person that she's met that she trusts, because everyone else she's met in the world are either too self-centered, materialistic, or not willing to help an old woman who just wants to be taken care of and supported. So she knows that it would probably ruin his life, but at the same time, she can't think of anyone better to trust, so she passes on her magic to him, and he becomes the new sorceress of the coven. He does not like it. He's not a fan of the situation, and the coven isn't a fan of him either because, again, it's a girls' club and boys icky, and so they don't want him involved. But as he learns about this new supernatural threat rising up, where this group of warlocks, these male magic users, want to overthrow the coven, who they feel have been oppressing them, they recognize, hey, you were a guy too, and you feel this oppression, right? Like, you had to change your whole body just to fit in with these people, and they still won't accept you. Why not just join us? Join us. We'll help and we'll overthrow them. But at the same time, he recognizes that the Warlock's got some problems too. So our main character is having trouble figuring out who he wants to be and what he wants to support. Does he support the Coven, even though they're kind of, a bunch of bitches, but they are the more stable government of the magical community? Or does he support the Warlocks, who, granted, are a little bit nicer to him, but at the same time, they're an unstable group and probably wouldn't run things better? Who does he support? And even that story that I just described to you is probably going to be redrafted, because this is a story that even as I get further into it, I'm like, no, and then I go back and then I rewrite it. It's a story that I want to make fun. I want to make good. Whether it's the story about the simple sorceress who supports her local PD, or the story about a sorceress trying to fit into a coven, or the story about some kid who got wrapped into something bigger than he actually was. It's one of these stories that I keep coming back to and saying, all right, let's write it. Let's keep writing it. And then I go, no, I got to rewrite it. And then I got to erase it and start from scratch. It's a very frustrating story. And it's not the first of its kind. I've had quite a few stories that happen like this, where I start off with an idea, but then rethink it, then write it, then rethink it, then write it, then rethink it. And as a writer, I think you run into those kind of stories where you have so many ideas and so many different directions you want to go with something. You can't do them all. But so you keep trying to balance, and that balancing act becomes difficult. So you feel like you have to erase and start over. It's a very difficult process to do. That's why I'm probably never going to read The Sorceress in one of my reading streams, just because I would read it to you and it might not be what the final product is or what the next product is. I think I've rewritten The Sorceress so many times. Like, it started off as an idea with me and Hannah that we came up with, and then it turned into Witch's Pilgrimage, which we erased, and then another story, and then which I erased, and then another story. I can't figure out exactly how I want this story to go, and that is probably the most frustrating thing ever. So you're probably asking, well, Raven, if you still haven't fully figured out this story, why are you sharing it? Because one of the things I want to do with story sharing is not just share my story ideas, but also share with you my writing advice and what I've learned from these experiences. And if I've learned anything from The Sorceress, I've learned one good, wonderful thing about writing and one terrible thing about writing. The good, wonderful thing about writing is there are so many opportunities and options before you. Never feel settled by just one. Just because Metamorphosis didn't work out doesn't mean that some of the concepts and ideas that I had with it can't still be incorporated in other stories. That doesn't mean the spirit of the story can't live into other things. And because you have so many creative ideas in story writing, you can come up with some creative, fun, awesome ideas. Don't be settled with just, it's about a witch who lives by herself in the woods. Nah, go places with it. You can go all over the place with it, or you could just keep it nice and simple. It is a simple day in the life story of a witch in the woods. You can do what you want with any kind of story and still be very much in love with it. But the bad part is that one of the difficult parts is sometimes you run into a concept or draft or idea that you just cannot be settled with. And I think that is so infuriating. And infuriating for me, especially because all the time and energy I put into writing and then going, no, I don't like it, and then going back. I'm not entirely sure what I want The Sorceress to be. Do I want it to be just a simple day in the life, slice of life story about a sorceress? Do I want it to be a law drama about a sorceress who helps the police solve crimes or solve supernatural crimes? Do I want it to be the story of a young boy or girl who get wrapped up in a sorceress adventure? Do I want it to be the story of a boy who became a sorceress woman and now has to rationalize how he's going to prove to these coven sorceresses that he is just as worthy as any of them? I mean, we see stuff like that in Mulan, where Mulan has to prove that through disguising herself as a man, she has to prove that she's just as worthy of being a soldier as any of them. But could you do that in the reverse? Could you prove that just because he was a guy formally means that he can't be a sorceress? There are ideas all over the place in these different story concepts, and any one of them could be the start of a really neat story idea, but which one do I want to write? And you might say, well, write all of them. Just tell it in different ways. Yeah, but you'd see the writing on the wall. You'd see the similarities, and I don't want that. I want a story that people will really love and enjoy. I don't want it to be just like Metamorphosis, which is why I'm kind of avoiding that latter idea, but the former idea sounds almost too boring for an audience to really enjoy. And yet I love Kiki's Delivery Service, which was just the day in the life of a witch who delivers stuff. But regardless, I'm going on a rambling tangent. What I want to say is The Sorceress was one of these stories that I'm still trying to figure out. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong for a writer who is still trying to figure out their story. If anything, if I was to give any caution to new and upcoming writers, don't jump on your first idea. think it out. Talk it out with other people. Write drafts and erase drafts, you know. No, I'm going to say this, and I mean it. The first draft of any project is never good enough to be the final product. You need to redraft, rewrite, replan. And the reason you do this is so that when you finally do get to that final draft, you know you've gone through every possible idea. The Sorceress in this case is just one that's taking a little bit more time than others to figure out. But, hey, you know what? I'm still having fun trying to figure it out, and one day I will figure it out, and when I do, I'm sure I'll be proud of it. But what do you guys think? Do you think that the Sorceress has any potential? Which version of the story do you think would be the most fun to hear? Like, do you think you'd like just the simple slice of life version, or something a little bit more crazy and out there and more adventurous? I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's a cool idea. I actually created my own kind of magic system for the Sorceress, and maybe someday I'll share that with you guys once I figure out how the Sorceress is going to go forward. But until then, guys, thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.